Hello, everyone, and welcome to this sermon discussion with the UCC Disabilities Ministries Disability Theology Committee. This is going to be a discussion of Jeremiah 29, verses 1 and 4 through 7. As preparation for sermon writing for pastors for Access Sunday. This is part of our Access Sunday resources, and you can find the full UCCDM Access Sunday resources at our website, uccdm.org. My name is Becca Anderson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am currently located in Danbury, Connecticut. I'm the co-chair of the UCC Disabilities Ministries Board. And I've got some lovely theologians here with me to talk about our scripture. Jacob, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Becca. My name is Jacob Nault. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I am currently located in Northeast Wisconsin, and I am sort of an unofficial member-at-large type person on the Disabilities Ministries Theology Committee.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jacob. And Laura.
Hi, I'm Reverend Laura Kanata. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am located in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Wonderful. And Jacob, before we get started, could you read our text for us today?
Yes, indeed. So this is one of the lectionary texts for the Access Sunday week. This comes out of the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29, verses 1 and verses 4 through 7. I am using the Common English Bible translation, which is one of my favorites, and one of my little favorite things about this this rendering is the heading above the text is "Disturbing Hope, Settling Down in Babylon." Settle down in Babylon. So this is the reading as it's been kept for us. The prophet Jeremiah sent a letter from Jerusalem to the few surviving elders among the exiles, to the priests and the prophets, and to all the people Nebuchadnezzar had taken to Babylon from Jerusalem. The Lord of heavenly forces, the God of Israel, proclaims to all the exiles I have carried off of Jerusalem to Babylon: build houses and settle down, cultivate gardens and eat what they produce, get married and have children. Then help your sons find wives and your daughters find husbands, in order that they too may have children. Increase in number there, so that you don't dwindle away. Promote the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because your future depends on its welfare. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Be to God. Thank you, Jacob. So before we discuss this passage today, we want to lift up that we only chose one passage from this week's lectionary to discuss. And those of you familiar with the lectionary might notice that there were two healing texts on offer in this week's lectionary, and we chose neither of them. So we just wanted to take a moment to lift that up and name that there are these times when healing texts are one of the times when people really tend to talk about disability. They're the texts that everyone focuses on a lot, and there is a lot of focus that needs to be done on them, and there are lots of really interesting things to be said about healing texts in general and about these texts in particular. But we really wanted to take this time to lift up that basically any text from scripture can relate to the experience of disability. It doesn't just have to be a text where a healing happens or where a disabled person appears. And also that sometimes those aren't the texts we really want to talk about. As disability theologians and preachers, Jacob and Laura and I all get asked about the healing texts all the time. And so we will have lots of opportunities to talk and preach about them. we won't necessarily get lots of opportunities to talk and preach about Jeremiah. And so we really wanted to take this moment to think deeply about a text that resonates with us, even if it's not the text that people typically associate with Access Sunday. Laura and Jacob, anything to add about that?
I don't think so. The only thing that I would say would be, I had a preaching professor who said one time that you should tackle the hard texts that might impact your people, because they could be used against you by people who are less informed about certain things. And so that's why I think a lot of people turn to disability theologians to talk about the healing texts in order to try to learn how to do things in a more generous and just way. And as much as it's important to get the perspective from somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, it can be very exhausting. And so I was very appreciative that we were talking about a text that wasn't that, and we could do something a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of wisdom to needing to talk about those texts, and we can, and we do, and we will, and it's tiring. And sometimes we want to talk about something else.
And the thing I would throw in is that this text talks about lots of everyday life experiences, and like working in a garden, building a house, getting married. And those are all things, like disability isn't all about disability and healing. Our lives are varied just like everybody else's. And so this is a good way to focus on that, on a different aspect other than, oh, you're disabled, let's talk about healing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura. And so with that, let's dive into this text. So this is a text written to the exiles in Babylon, just a few years after they had left Jerusalem. And in preparing for this conversation, we were all talking about this position of exile, and the ways in which that relates to experiences of disability. Jacob, do you want to start us off on that conversation?
Absolutely. So I think one of the, when we were planning this out, one of the pieces of this text that was deeply resonating with so many of us was talking about exile. The exile that is done to us and the exile that we do to ourselves. When we are trying our best to navigate a society that was not built for us, and in fact, in many ways, it was built exactly for our exclusion, we recognize the ways that our bodies and minds are exiled by society. There are certain places and certain events and certain situations that are not accessible to us, and some of us have, all of us have experienced various ways that some people have been less than generous when we have pointed that out. And we have said, hey, look, this isn't quite as accessible or as just or generous as it could be. And some people get defensive rather than actually taking that and saying, oh, let me think about that, and let's revision it together in a way that's more accessible and more helpful and more inclusive, and instead going the other direction. So there is that social exile that we are forced in, that we did not choose, and connected to that, there is the exile that we enforce upon ourselves because of the internalized ableism that we believe about ourselves. I would imagine that everybody here has internalized ableism in some way throughout their lives and has realized that, like, hey, I believe this only because somebody told me that this is what the situation is. And like, that doesn't have to be the narrative. That doesn't have to be the story. You know, we can we we are in this body, we are in this mind, we are in this place, we are in this time that we are in. And this text, I think, asks us to make the best of it and to try to live in such a way that we can thrive even in a situation that is not built for us. And the last verse says, you know, promote the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Pray to God for it, because your future depends on its welfare. Our future as disabled people depends on how we can navigate this society that was not built for us, and how we can navigate this life that sometimes gives us challenges that we didn't expect. And there we have sort of a vested interest in its success, because we have a vested interest in our success.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all of that, Jacob. And you know, just to put some concrete terms to some of that, you know, like and I'm sure we all could share stories of this, but you know, I remember a particular time when as a kid I was auditioning for a musical theater camp, and I didn't get in, and it was specifically told that the reason was the people in charge didn't think that they could teach a blind girl to dance, and they didn't want to have to deal with that. And so that was an example of exile being imposed upon me, that you know that there was a space that I literally could not be in because of my disability. And then there have been other times where I have chosen not to go to events or go to places because I knew that the amount of assistance that I would need in order to do that, I was worried that people would resent me for asking for that assistance, even though it was a thoroughly reasonable thing for me to ask. And that's the kind of imposing exile on myself of saying, you know, based on my experience and based on what people have told me about my worth and value, I don't, my desire to be in these spaces is not as important as the inconvenience it would be for other people for me to be there. And that's just something I am trying to unlearn all the time, is to remember I value when my disabled friends are in spaces, even if it's a little bit more work to make sure they can be there. And I need to trust that other people feel the same way about me. Laura, anything you would add to this discussion of exile?
Two thoughts popped into my head when we were talking about how this world was built, not only not built for us, but built to our exclusion. And it reminds me of the ugly laws that were in the books as late as 1963, I remember specifically, but maybe even later, that disabled, disfigured people with physical differences were not allowed in restaurants or movie theaters because they might make the other patrons feel uncomfortable or even ill. And that's a societal thing, a form of exile that was just enacted upon people. And then the other thing that popped into my head when Jacob was talking about the different, you know, the narratives we tell ourselves and the narratives society tell us, is this really good book called Disfigured on Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Meaning. And it talks just about that, specifically talks about like fairy tales and Disney movies and other things in that such media. and how if the bad guy, one example, it's not the whole book, but one example is if the bad guy is always disabled or disfigured, has a scar or a limp or something, what does that tell to society about disabled people and little children? Oh, she's got a limp. What if she's a bad guy, or the wicked witch or something? And then also, what does it tell about the people with the deformity and the disability? How do they feel about themselves if they're constantly only shown as the bad guy? So those were the two thoughts that were really running through my mind during that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that. With the ugly laws, like there were times when legally disabled people were barred from public space, were exiled, and yeah, the ways in which we are represented or not represented also limits the spaces that we can imagine ourselves in, and how we understand ourselves and how other people understand us. Another example I think of is I didn't see a lot of representations of blind adults getting the kind of supports that I got as a child. I saw a lot of representation of blind adults just kind of living very, very independently without seeming to be bothered by their disability at all. And so I kind of assumed that when you turned 18, blindness stopped really mattering and all of the things that were hard would just stop being hard. And there was no path for me to understand myself as a blind adult for a long time. So another thing that we want to talk about is what this passage, what Jeremiah is instructing the exiles in Babylon to do here, right? Is how do you respond to this experience of exile? So if disability, in some sense, has relations to exile, what is the call that we are being given here? The line that I want to highlight is rendered a little differently in the CEV translation that Jacob read, but in the NRSV, chapter 29, verse 5, is build houses and live in them. And the way that resonated to me was, this is my body, live in it. Because if disability is an experience that feels like exile, right? That ableism, both from society and internalized, can feel like exile, and sometimes physically it can feel very alienating as well. The experiences of physical pain or mental anguish can lead many of us to feel very distant from our bodies. I think the call to live in the place that you are feels very sacred to me. The idea of both in terms of the society that you're in, praying for it to make it better, but also the body and the community that you can build in your society. Really live in it. Don't see it as or don't let that exile, that feeling of exile, drive you away from what you can live in and inhabit. It feels like a real call to me to be present to ourselves, to be present to the people who are trying to be present to us. I don't want to read this as a call to just accept the ableism that exists. But I read it rather as a call to build new things, but not to kind of throw out the whole nature of your own embodiment, even when it's hard sometimes. So that's a line that really resonated with me. Laura and Jacob, do you have things to add about that?
I don't think so. I think you encapsulated it really well.
I think you did too.
Thank you. So another point we wanted to touch on is the ending of this, or close to the end of this passage. There's a lot of talk about having children and your children getting married and having children, kind of an echo of other biblical passages to be fruitful and multiply. And these kinds of passages can be very complex for folks with disabilities. And so we want to flag that for you preachers and give you some of our thoughts on how to approach these passages. Laura, you want to get us started with that?
Yeah, I've been reading a lot of disability justice books and a lot of people's blogs and things. And it just strikes me right now we're in a, I don't know, in general, a reproductive kind of crisis.
Mhm.
And you can take that whatever way you want to take it. But the thing is there are so many, for example, we want you to be fruitful and multiply, but what they don't put in there is unless you're disabled. And I don't mean that in like the disabled people can't be fruitful and multiply, but I do mean that society thinks that. Because for one thing, we can't even get married without losing our health insurance and our social security benefits, because then we are supposed to rely entirely on our spouse. And I strongly think that's a form of a very low form, but still a form of eugenics, because if you're not married, you're not going to have kids, and then you're not going to have disabled kids, and the society won't have to take care of those disabled kids for you. That's the other thing, the assumption that if you're disabled, you can't take care of your children. There are still today in like, I don't even know how many states, disabled people can get their kids taken away based on the fact that the parent is disabled. No abuse, no neglect, just you're disabled, you can't possibly manage the child. It won't be safe for you or the child. Blah, blah. So all these things, and some of us can't for whatever reason. Like I personally would love to have a child, grew up dreaming of having a child. You get the white picket fence mentality, the narratives that are told to you, I was going to have the house, the pets, the kids, the spouse, and all these things. And then when you grow up, it's like, oh, but you can't have them. Everybody else can have them, but you can't. And that is a form of exclusion and exile. And I know I physically can't have a kid because it just wouldn't work with my body structure. But also, I highly doubt anyone's going to let me adopt a kid. And there's just different things. And I don't say any of this to be bitter. I'm just stating facts. And so these are all things to think about with this passage. And I don't know, is there anything anyone else would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would also add, like you take all of that and then you add the internal work that a lot of disabled people have to go through if they physically can and do want to have kids, about passing on their disabilities. That society really assumes that is always a bad and terrible thing. And as Laura alluded to, that's eugenics. That's saying that how we, the three of us on this call, and many other disabled people, how we exist in the world is a bad and wrong thing, and that having more of us would be a bad and wrong thing. And so that's a really painful societal assumption to have put on you and your reproductive choices. But you then also need to take into account, some of us wouldn't want to pass on our disabilities. Some of us experience a lot of pain and struggle through our disability and wouldn't wish that on a child. And some of us aren't sure, and we need space to figure that out. And instead, what we get is a lot of society saying, well, you can't be parents anyway, and even if you could, you shouldn't. And there's just so much pressure out there that is all in ableism. So you read these verses about having children and your children having children, and what I think of is that call should extend equally to disabled and non-disabled people. It's not, I don't read it as saying we all need to have children. I read it as saying we all should have the opportunity to make our own choices about it.
I would also add two things. One disturbing trend is that folks with disabilities are at a disadvantage in terms of sexual education, health education, in terms of how we learn and how we're taught and how we have the opportunity to explore our own bodies. Not to get super crass about this, but it's a disturbing trend that a lot of sexual or health education doesn't include an understanding of what that's like for disabled bodies, and that's a very difficult situation, and also these kinds of passages are triggering for many folks who have experienced pregnancy loss or miscarriage or other difficult pregnancy things that people generally just don't want to talk about in any situation, but that's another piece that needs to be brought to the fore as well.
And I imagine, I think they can also be extremely invalidating and weaponized against people who've had abortions as well. You know, if the command is have children and someone chooses to terminate a pregnancy, that can be read as going against that command. And again, you know, I read this passage as being about choice and about family, about, you know, settling into a place, you know, that whatever ways in which you form family, I think would be following this verse, but that potential for harm is very much within this text for sure.
And it also dismisses the various ways in which adults have the opportunity to care for children outside of having their own. You know, if they're teachers, or if they're or if they care for children as some other profession or vocation, that's equally valid and equally beautiful, and yet not represented in a text like this.
Absolutely. Well, Laura and Jacob, thank you so much for engaging with this text with me. Any closing thoughts before we end our discussion today?
I just want to say thanks for to all who are watching this, for believing in this work and engaging in this work, because without you we could not do this work, and we really are thankful that you took the time to dig in with us.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, and thank you to you both for doing this with me. And yeah, it's wonderful.
Sure is.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Thanks, for friends. A wonderful conversation. Thank you all for watching. And again, you can find the rest of our Access Sunday resources at uccdm.org. All right, take care. Goodbye.
Take care.